Welcome to episode 83 of the XRM Toolcast. In this episode, Scott and I speak with fellow MVP and host of his own podcast, Amazing Apps, Neil Benson. We talk about tools and suggestions for estimating projects, and how Neil wants me to run with him 10 kilometers, uphill, in the rain, over a bridge, with holes. So as you might guess, it's a rather entertaining episode, and Neil is an excellent communicator and a great guest. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of the XRM Toolcast. With me, your host, Daryl, always raising the bar, and my co-host, Scotty Zendler founder.
Yes.
Daryl.
Yes.
So
Zendler founder. Yes.
Last part. Zendler founder. So you are a founder of Zendler. That's the educational learning kind of platform thing. Or
yeah,
did you just
absolutely.
Get a free t-shirt,
yeah, it's awesome, man. They gave. Yeah, I mean, it's awesome because they give out free swag. Anything that gives out free swag. Maybe we can bring that segment back to the show where people send me free stuff and then I wear it or show it on the show, because that would be great. So please,
yes,
send me free
also
stuff.
known as the Daniel Kai episode. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, please send me free stuff. Shameless. It really is, isn't it? But no, but I specifically wore this shirt because of our guest. It was a kind of a segue into introducing our guest, and perhaps we can talk about that a minute. But yeah,
that sounds great.
Welcome, Neil.
So our guest, Neil Benson, a Scrum coach and Microsoft Business Apps MVP at customary.com, a podcast host, AmazingApps.Show, and an online course creator, customary.academy. Welcome, Neil.
Thanks, Daryl. Thanks, Scott. Great to be on the show. My online course platform is run on Zendler. So that's the connection with, in fact, I've got a matching t-shirt. I should run up to my bedroom and grab it. You won't see me changing t-shirts on your YouTube channel. Is that how this is going to go?
Yeah. Well, maybe if you took your shirt off, we'd have more reviews.
We did have an episode where I didn't get the memo, and there was like matching Daryl. Who was that? Someone was wearing a matching t-shirt, and I had a matching t-shirt. So maybe we should do that more often. We need to coordinate everyone beforehand and wear matching t-shirts Yeah.
Well, not all of us can manage to miss the bus and still get into work today like Neil. So I thought maybe his days of missing the bus was over, but no, his bus didn't come this morning, and now he's having to sit at home rather than at work to join us. So
it's commitment. Yeah. So thank you, Neil, so much for committing to this podcast. It really shows that we really appreciate the fact that you haven't gone into work today and you stayed home.
In fact, I'm going to triple what we're paying you for this episode.
I'm going to let you into a little secret. It's not even my home.
Wait, what? You've just gone in to random person's home?
Almost. You can see the Danish flag in the background. That's my parents-in-law from Denmark, and they live around the corner from my house, which is just around there. And we've been living with them for the last 3 or 4 months while our house is being renovated. So I have the pleasure of living with my in-laws.
Oh, yes.
Wow. That's commitment on both counts then, really, I think.
It is. I'm not sure who's more eagerly anticipating the renovations being complete.
It's you. It's okay to say. It's you.
Yeah. No, it's I've been there as well. So I've done it the other way around as well. So it was like, they came to stay with us while they had their house redone, and so then we felt that we had to reciprocate, and but so yes, your course. You recently put a fantastic post on LinkedIn, and it really caught our eye. Sort of really drew us in. I love the way that you put your content out on LinkedIn, because it's not like the kind of the clickbait, BuzzFeedy type typical thing. However, it's really interesting, and it really makes you want to read it. So you do a really good job of it. And quite often you are attracting people to your course or your podcast. So tell us a bit more about those two things.
Oh, thanks, Scott. So yeah, the premise behind that particular post on LinkedIn was a comparison of what happens when somebody estimates how much it's going to cost or how long it's going to take to paint your house. And my house is getting renovated, so there's some painting going on at the moment. And drawing a parallel between that process and how we estimate our business applications, which is the topic of my new course called Estimating Business Applications. Because I know there's lots of great MVPs and other community contributors who put out lots of great technical content about how to build something, how to publish something, how to release something, how to manage a platform. But there are a few of us who are talking more broadly about how to estimate, how to collaborate as a team, how to manage projects, how to cope with change, how to manage requirements, how to bring design thinking into our projects, which are a bit more esoteric kind of topics, but I think just as valuable and just as essential when we come to build amazing business applications, which is what we're all here for.
Yeah, totally.
Is this estimating just the non-code portion of it, or is this both? This is everything, kit and caboodle, anything on the platform here?
Estimating all the work that needs to get done to take a business aspiration and turn it into a business application. So yeah, it includes the analysis, design, development, testing, releasing, documenting, all of that effort. And then there's all the non-functional stuff as well. Security testing, penetration testing, all the things that customers like us to do as well. And wrap all of that up, estimate the size of it is what I like to do first. And from the size, we can then derive the duration and the cost by knowing how fast our team will go. And that's philosophy. So by knowing all of that, you can put together a much reasonably accurate estimate. Estimates are never perfect. They're never complete.
Well, you said your BuzzFeed intro. I mean, I'm going to use BuzzFeed now, even though I said it wasn't BuzzFeed. But your intro was, do you estimate projects in days? I did, and my estimate sucks. It's like, ooh, I've got to go and click on that because I've got to find out why Neil's estimate sucked.
Well, estimating in time generally does. We're all tempted to estimate, that'll take me 4 hours. And there's a couple of big problems with that. First of all, if I tell a stakeholder it'll take me 4 hours or 4 days or 4 weeks, what they expect is that it'll be done in 4 hours, 4 days, or 4 weeks. They think you're going to start now and work continuously up until that thing is ready to go. And that's not what I meant. I meant, if I ever start it, when I start it, it'll take about 4 hours. And
if I can find uninterrupted time as well.
Yeah, so that's one big problem is people hear a time-based estimate and they think that's the elapsed time, whereas what I mean is that's the duration of the effort it's going to take. And the second thing is if I estimate a piece of work, but Scott does it or Daryl does it, well, you guys are much better than I am at developing, right? So if I estimate an Azure function, it's going to take 4 days to develop, well, Scott will have it done in 2 days and Daryl will have it done in an hour and a half. So I can't account for talent in my estimates. And so it's really hard if you're estimating as a team without knowing exactly who's going to be doing the work. We all have different paces at which we work. And that's why time-based estimates don't work, is because elapsed time and duration get conflated, and I don't know who's going to do it.
Well, I mean, because you mentioned two things there, time, duration and effort. And I mean, I'm think back to, when I was first starting in software and I was talking about, okay, how do I kind of plan this? And people were asking me, how much is it going to cost or how long is it going to take? That was the first kind of big principle, that differential, because I was using Microsoft Project back then. This podcast is called XRM Toolcast, right? So yeah, the wince there. Those of you listening on the not on YouTube,
it's like I can't talk to Scott anymore. He used Project.
Biggest. We're talking about 90s here, and Project was that was basically the way everyone did it. It was project managers. It was all traditional project managers that had come out of other industries, moving into the software industry, and they just had no idea how to manage estimation. And so Microsoft Project had effort and it had duration. It had things like resource leveling, and it was all this stuff which actually, ironically, was more applicable to painting houses, actually, because the things that you are measuring, the things that you were doing, kind of, okay, I'm painting a wall, I'm building in some particular thing. There were things that you did over and over and over and over again. So we're XRM Toolcast, right? So we need to talk about tools in some way. In your LinkedIn post, you talked about the fact that the painters will look about it in terms of estimating the size and estimating the complexity. So what tools do you use? Any tools that can help with that, and how do they help? And don't say the tool is your course, because you can say that at the end, right? But don't say that just yet. Don't spoil it just yet.
Well, okay. In the course, I do talk about tools. One of my favorite tools for estimating as a group is the calculator app on my phone. So it's about as basic as you can get. But whenever I do agile estimation sessions, you're familiar with Planning Poker, the Planning Poker game. So in Planning Poker...
maybe describe it just for listeners that maybe you're not familiar with that.
The idea behind Planning Poker is we want to reduce the bias that if we're estimating together as a team on how complex or how much effort a requirement might take, if Daryl goes first and says, I think it'll take 4 hours, or we're using story points, and Scott says, I think it's an 8-point user story. Well, that now creates a bias for everybody else in that team. They're going, I thought it was bigger. I don't want to say bigger because Scott's a fond of all knowledge, and I don't want to contradict him in the middle of this meeting. And there's our customer. Oh, that would be embarrassing for him.
So, Daryl never contradicts me. Never, ever would.
Never. So Planning Poker, we describe the requirement, we get to ask a few questions about it, and then we all estimate together in secret, and then we all reveal our estimates at the same time. And in order to do that, it's common to use a physical deck of Planning Poker cards, which are cards specially printed with your estimation scale on them. You can use a deck of playing cards if you wanted. But if you don't happen to have either of those available, you can get an app for your phone. And I've been caught short. New phone in Planning Poker, didn't have time to download the app. I just used the calculator app, and I type in the number of story points and then reveal it when asked to do that by the So that's as basic as it gets. You can play Planning Poker with the calculator app. How about that? A tool in the toolcast.
Wow, yes.
If the number is less than 10 or less, you could use your fingers too, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So it's like, like when the judges reveal their scores, it's like the big reveal, and then the judges look at each other and go, hey, wait a minute, why did you give like 3 and I've given 10? That's when all the really juicy conversations start to happen, and it's like, oh, well, I didn't even think about that, and like, well, that's way more complicated. Yeah.
There's always a tester who says, oh, you've forgotten the security tests. Like, we need to test this under 13 different security rules, and that's going to take me days and days. Oh, yeah. Nobody ever thinks of a tester.
What about unit testing, Daryl?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Actually, so I was speaking to a dev the other day, and he was like, yeah, I'm just trying to convince to the end user how much better it is if they actually do testing. Like, it'll catch all these bugs. And I was like, why don't you do it in reverse? And why don't you create a whole bunch of bugs that would have gotten caught with testing? And then they know, they should have done testing. Like, rather than trying to convince them it's good, just do it really poorly and then say, well, if you had it, you would have, doing it that way. So that was,
like,
remind me of that.
Mind blown. But so that's estimating the size in points. So you're saying points, right? And so presumably the more complex, the more points.
Yeah.
But also presumably the larger the particular story that you're estimating, or indeed anything. I suppose you don't even need to call them stories if you're just estimating some particular thing that everyone needs to work together to do. So if someone's estimating more points, the more complexity, how does that sort of work alongside another estimate? How do you kind of make sure that the estimation of these points is loosely in terms of size and complexity relates to another one. Otherwise, it kind of loses its meaning somewhat.
So what I like to do with a team at the start of a project is to tease out a relatively small requirement, something that might take the team a couple of days to develop from start to finish. And we call that our baseline requirement, baseline user story if we're using user stories. Let's call that a 3-point user story. Now we can compare all the other items that we want to estimate against that baseline, and say, is it bigger or smaller? Is it half as big or half as small or twice as big or twice as small? And that's how we estimate the relative size of all the other items in our backlog. And then over time, let's say we're using an estimation scale, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, classic Fibonacci scale. We might have a reference for a 13-point story, and a reference for a 3-point story, and a reference for an 8-point story. And so we gather together the 8s and say, oh yeah, they all feel about the same level of complexity, but similar amount of effort when you adjust for risk. And over time, that team gets to understand its baseline. They might shift over time, but if a new developer joins us, we can say, hey, look, here's a collection of 1-point user stories. These are all nice and fast, low risk. We can knock these out really quickly. We can get 30 or 40 of those done in a 2-week sprint. Here are some 8-point user stories. Oh, there's a lot more risk in there, complexity. There were unknowns that we didn't know when we did the estimates. And we can only really take on 4 or 5 of those in a 2-week sprint. And that helps people calibrate, and off they go. And then they can join us in the next planning poker session.
Yeah.
So one of the hardest things that I have when I deal with estimating is back to the, who's doing the work and what skills do they have? Because unfortunately, I know my skills the best, and it's hard for me to jump out and figure out, well, what's his skills, or what's their skills, and so how are they going to view? How is the average person on the team going to view that complexity? So I think going through and defining, hey, this is our reference point scale. At least that way, I can kind of use that to figure. Okay, so I think this is more complicated, so I can just increase it rather than going, well, if Steve works on it, it's going to be great. If Bill works on it, it's going to take twice as long. And so I guess that kind of helps to remove some of that. And then that keeps your output the same, because if you're estimating the same basic amount of work, who's working on what doesn't matter a whole bunch, I guess.
That's right.
As long as you can handle for like
are you a trail runner, Daryl? You look pretty fit. You like to run a few Ks?
I run a 5K 3 days a week usually.
Okay, perfect.
It's not very fast, but it's below a 10-minute mile. So
that's great. So you and I could take a trail run and know how many kilometers it is. Let's say it's a 10K trail run, 6 miles.
Okay.
And this particular trail run that we're going to look at, it's got some really steep climbs, and it's been raining, so it's pretty muddy. And there's a couple of bridges that we need to get over. And I think one of the bridges has actually got a couple of holes in it, so we're going to have to slow down at that part. So we can both look at that and go, well, it's a 10K trail, and I normally run 10Ks an hour, but Neil says it's got a lot of uphills, puddles, holes in the bridges. It's going to take me an hour and a half. Now, somebody else like Scott, who doesn't run trails, he might not run as quickly, but he can still estimate the size of that trail, even though his pace when he goes to run it is different from ours. And so we can all call it a 15-point trail, even though we all run at different paces. So that's my analogy for estimating the size of a story. I don't know how fast you're going to go, but I know what relative size it's got compared to other stories.
So what this tells me, Scott, is if you want to be a Scrum Master, you need really, really good analogies. Painting a house, running a trail.
You also need to be a good runner as well.
And yes, apparently you have to run too. That's another
one. So that's a really, I do like that analogy, and I think that the whole kind of team sport, that's really makes it clear that everyone is really pulling together. It's not just like, okay, this person's going to do this. They got to go away for 2 weeks and then come back and say, ha, ta-da, here it is. And then someone else is going to, which is like what, in a sense, what a painting team would do. You know, okay, that painting, that person's going to go and paint those walls, that, because it wouldn't make sense to kind of go and help someone to paint something necessarily. Well, maybe it does, I don't know. But anyway, the analogy may fall down. But again, you know, going back to tools, you know, is there any tools, especially in this virtual world, that we increasingly find ourselves in? You know, you mentioned using the calculator and showing somebody, you know, is there any tools that, you know, you can use to manage those tasks that you're kind of working on, the stories, managing that, measuring that velocity that you were just sort of talking about?
Well, there's a couple that a lot of us will be very familiar with in our Microsoft world, and one of those is Azure DevOps. You might be more familiar with it from a CI/CD point of view, managing your builds, your pipelines, and your artifacts. But those of us working at the front end of a project can also manage our requirements and our work items and our sprints in there as well. And the items in Azure DevOps can also have estimates of size. I really encourage product owners, that's normally the person on the customer side who's giving us the requirements, to also estimate the relative business value of a requirement as well. And they can use a similar scale if they like. That's not a very common practice, but we're going to see that more and more. And then the developers will estimate the relative size of that requirement as well. You can track all of that in Azure DevOps. My last few projects, I've had customers who prefer to use Jira for that. I have to speak carefully about Jira. It's a very, Atlassian, the vendor, is a very successful Australian technology company. But man, it's got a user interface even its mother couldn't love. It's shocking.
Ooh, harsh.
So yeah, we struggle with Jira on a few projects. So those are two very popular tools. There's another one that I really like for user story mapping. So taking that traditional product backlog, which is an ordered list, you could see that in an Excel spreadsheet or in Azure DevOps, and it just goes from top to bottom, most valuable to the least valuable. It doesn't really tell you what stakeholders have got requirements. Is our business process covered from one end to the other? And so you can use a technique called user story mapping to help you visualize your product backlog in 2 or 3 dimensions. And that's really cool, very powerful visualization for discussing the backlog with your stakeholders and prioritizing things and thinking about releases over the medium and longer term. And there are tools you can use for that as well. There's one that is an add-on for Azure DevOps called SpecFlow, I believe it's called, or SpecMap. It's nice because it's all built into Azure DevOps. If you haven't got your backlog in Azure DevOps yet, my preference is another one called StoriesOnBoard. StoriesOnBoard is a third-party tool that can integrate with Jira or with DevOps, and you can build out your user story map in there. It's got all your epics, your features, your user stories, your estimates, and then the status of all those work items as well. And really helps you visualize what you're going to be working on.
Okay, you mentioned something that was confusing to me. You can visualize your work items in three dimensions? So you can arrange them in 2 dimensions, so vertically and horizontally, and then you can split the horizontal slices up into releases as well. So you've got the priority within each release, and then you can have releases prioritized as well. So it's maybe not 3 dimensions like time and space. It's like 3 groupings almost more. So
yeah.
And AR as well, and like it's a VR kind of like I can kind of manipulate stuff around, and Minority Report kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, there's certain things that I can visualize in 2 dimensions. When I get in 3 dimensions, like I'm done. And when I was doing trigonometry,
I think stacking stuff is always quite an interesting. When you start to stack things, it does give you a notion of something. Well, actually, we're not interested in stuff underneath of that just yet. We'll get to that, or maybe grouping things, and there's some grouping, then you can kind of expand out onto it. But yeah, those are good tips. Definitely we'll check those out. I'm still struggling to get past. I'm feeling very sorry for Jira and how its mother doesn't like its user interface. It's like with like babies. And then everyone's like, "Oh, look, it's a baby," and you can't say, "Oh, it's a really ugly baby," but it's like
how precious. Isn't that the Seinfeld episode?
That's right. Oh, how precious. Yeah. So we'll talk about Jira from now on as it's such a precious user interface.
So I was sitting with a client a few years ago, kicking off their Dynamics CRM implementation. It was a university, And they said, oh, we're going to be managing everything in Jira. I was like, oh, please, no, Jira. And they said, do you realize the building you're sitting in was paid for by the founders of Atlassian? They went to University of New South Wales. Like, oh, okay, I better behave myself.
Sorry.
You're going to get struck with lightning, I guess, huh?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are connectors as well. You can get between Jira and DevOps and GitHub, so you can kind of sync those two things. So, if different teams are using different tools. So I guess it's, as long as you're using the same principles and everyone's agreed on the kind of things you're talking about. But, there's always going to be that inevitable question. That someone's going to say, but how much is it going to cost? And how long is it going to take you to do these requirements? It will be done. And if you've got, especially if you've got a new team, right? And you haven't really worked in that team before. It's like a team that's just been recruited into, and you've got stakeholders saying, "Okay, give us your estimate." Do you have any kind of tips for people in that situation or ways of dealing with that?
Sounds like a shorter is cat sort of question.
My experience is different from most other people in the agile world who say that the best way to figure out how fast your team can go and get stuff done is just to let them go for a few sprints and build up that empirical data so that you can look back on actual performance data and say, this is how fast we can go. Well, I've never managed to work with their prospective customers to say, hey, look, give me a statement of work for a couple of months, and then I'll tell you how much it's going to cost. No, you don't win too many business applications opportunities that way.
Oh, if only. Can we just single-handedly change the industry now so that could happen?
Yeah. You imagine a government RFP just says, we'll tell you once we're finished how much it's going to cost you. So we do need to make a forecast before we start with no data. And that's where experience comes into play. So, hopefully as a Microsoft partner, for example, or even as a customer team internally, you've got some experience building applications, maybe a case management application for a government department. This is another case management application for a government department. You've got some industry expertise, you've got some domain expertise in case management. You put that together so you can look at the customer's high-level requirements and go, that project feels a bit bigger than this other project. Mm-hmm. So just like we did with user stories, where we're doing relative estimation, we can either break down the requirements small enough in estimate and roll back up again to get us a relative size, or we can just compare projects and just say, that one feels like a big project, a 5 on a project estimation scale. And normally those things take about 9 months and they cost $1 million. And that's our estimate.
I can just see two agile Scrum experts in a room saying, show me yours and I'll show you mine sort of thing.
yeah. Or don't touch that with a 10-foot barge pole.
In the government opportunity.
I mean, do you ever say, for instance, we can't give you, there's not enough information to give you an estimate on that in terms of cost? I mean, what would you do if, for example, they say that the requirements say, it has to integrate with an external system that we've never integrated with, or we've got no information on, or the typical one is we have to have milliseconds response time, and you look at it and you think, man, that's run away.
Yeah. So some of my favorite requirements are those: the system shall be capable of having automated workflows. Okay. It does. What do you need those workflows to do? Because that's what I need to estimate. So we do get some rotten requirements. They're really tough to estimate. And you put a number on them and you say, we think the estimate is X, and here is our assumptions, that we will build some logic apps to integrate with that. There's an API available and other constraints that you want to put on that. We don't know. We put a big number on it because we're really unsure. And normally, when a customer looks at your estimates, go, that's a 3, that's a 13, that's 100. You've estimated 100 for doing the data migration. How come? Well, that's because you told us nothing about the existing data. We don't know what the quality is, and we don't know how many tables it's got to come from. So we've just put a big, hairy, scary number on it. Let's talk about that and dive into that further.
Yeah, that's
Go ahead, Daryl.
Well, that sounds like our current project where we assumed, and they said they had duplicates of users across multiple systems. They wanted to combine them into one. We assumed that they would want to have the same social security number across all organizations, and we assumed that their date of birth would want to be the same among all instances of the system. But that turned out to be false. And so, as you can imagine, that makes it a little more complicated when now we need to show multiple date of births for an individual and multiple social security numbers. And
yeah. Geez. It's like, what? So
we did not estimate that one high enough, I'll tell you that.
Multiple dates of birth? Is that like Her Majesty the Queen, who's got the official birthday? And then
the official one, yeah.
This is healthcare stuff that they're using to verify who a person is. So
wow.
You call up and what's your date of birth? Oh, it's February 1st. Try again. February 2nd. You got it. I mean, another data I don't know about.
Data quality sounds like a bit suspect. It's like,
and I also saw a field for multiple dates of death as well. So apparently that's possible. But
I to be honest, I do have a official date of birth, and then I have a social media birthday as well, which is different.
Okay.
So,
wow, is this a first? Does anyone know about this yet? Is this is this a public kind of? Because if not, this is an exclusive. We know Hello Magazine exclusive that Neil Benson has got a social media official birthday.
So there are some social media things that you absolutely have to tell them your date of birth. Like, Twitter doesn't need to know my date of birth. LinkedIn does. LinkedIn especially, because it'll post it's Neil's birthday today. I hate that. So LinkedIn doesn't know my birthday. But there are some applications that think they really ought to know your date of birth. So I give them one that's pretty close to my actual birthday, but it's not my actual birthday. So everybody's going to get a data breach someday, and I don't want my date of birth out there. Thanks very much.
Oh, okay.
Anyway.
So it's for security reasons. Yes.
Topic, Daryl. Thanks for that.
But no, I do enjoy. Yes, I enjoy these little sidetracks. I mean, I just like Google kind of with a little, when you go, gives you little birthday sort of, little confetti and balloons and stuff on your birthday. I mean, it's the little things that make, brighten my day. It doesn't take much. I mean, if someone sends me an email with an emoji in it, I'm happy. So, it's, but yeah, so that's very interesting. I mean, I think that what you were just saying about, being able to actually say, well, this is a huge estimate because of the unknowns and the risk, and so I think that to me, that really removes the stigma, because I think, if you've got a mechanism that you can clearly show risk and uncertainty in something that is just a single number, because you're not saying, oh, well, this is 100 days, because then someone will say, well, that's too long, I'm going to go to someone else. You're saying this is 100 points. And so, but how do you persuade people to go down that route from beginning? I mean, because if someone was asking for an estimate, in a traditional sense, in a Microsoft project, what's your sort of like your elevator pitch?
So there are definitely some projects that I will never win, never be invited to participate in, where they say, please fill in your Gantt chart and send us your day rates and estimate all these requirements. There's 650 pages of them. Please estimate to the nearest hour, or in 15-minute increments. I just run away. So I'm looking for opportunities to take an agile approach, either because the client wants to do their first ever agile project, or because they're open to it, or because they've got a good track record in agile delivery for other types of applications they've built internally. Or they come knocking on my door because they say, hey, Neil, I heard you can do agile stuff with business applications, and that sounds like a good way to save time, save cost, have better projects, more fun, those kind of things. So they invite me to participate, and I'm really grateful for those opportunities. And so enough of those crossed my path, and I managed to secure enough of them that I can make a living out of it.
Keeps you out of trouble, keeps you off the streets. It's like, well, it's,
but you're still living at your in-laws.
So we recently had a local government department here in Queensland. We built a drink drivers database for them. So it's the membership system you don't want to be a member of if you're caught with high blood alcohol content. And the government published a lessons to emulate report at the end of that, saying this project was so well run. The dynamics component was a very small part of the overall program, but it was a very agile project, which was kind of unique in this government department. They have a track record of very waterfall projects going over budget and over time. And this one didn't. It delivered on all its promises, and everybody's pretty happy. So, those kind of things.
But you called it drink drivers?
Yeah, the drink driving reform was the name of the government program. Yeah.
What do they call it in Canada rather than drunk driving? They call it drink driving.
Drink driving? Yeah, drink drivers in the UK. Right. Yeah.
US is always drunk drivers. Interesting.
I think it's like a kind of past tense. It's like drink drivers is like as you're doing it. It's like
yes. Where you're already drunk and now you're driving. I don't.
Yeah.
DUI drivers. I don't know.
Well, there's again, this is completely off topic, but in Canada, there's a signpost that says "wrap," and every time I think of Jonas because it's like report poachers or report. I don't know what it actually stands for, but it's so which is ironic. Well, it says underneath it says what it stands for, but I never get to that point because I just think of Jonas, and then of course I've driven past it. Yeah. But I think it's something to do with being under the influence. But so that's very interesting. So when you're working on these projects, is there any scope for upfront architecture? My job title is solution architect, right? So would you? Because at the beginning, you said, well, actually, you would do this agile right from the beginning. But do you ever get involved, get a solution architect involved to say, well, actually, we're not going to start an agile project yet. We're going to do a sort of more of a discovery phase and, get an idea for things and do a little bit of investigation.
Are you looking for work, Scott?
Yeah, I like to do a little bit.
Maybe.
So typically when we've done the proposal and we've got a very set of high-level requirements, enough to get an estimate and win the project, now we're off to the races. We might need to do some work to get started. Before we do sprint one, we're actually developing and building increments of working software. And that might include diving down into the next set of requirements in a bit more detail. It'll also include maybe a little bit of upfront solution architecture, just enough to prove out what the integration patterns might be. Now, you told us that thing over there has got a RESTful API. Let's validate that. Let's fire some messages at it. And let's get some data back. Figure out whether functions or logic apps or Power Automate might be the right option there. And we'll validate some of those patterns that we've made assumptions on when we did our estimates. We document that in a little solution architecture, 2B kind of solution architecture document, trying to keep that really lightweight, a few slides, a few pages. This is not hundreds of pages of detailed design. And then we'll update that as we build features. And so that when we come to finish the project and we've released everything into production, right off into the sunset, we've left behind an as-built solution design document that describes how everything actually works. And even better, if we've documented why it was built that way, what decisions did we make along the way, what options did we evaluate? Well, we had A, B, and C. We chose B for these reasons. A and C were good ideas, but weren't available or weren't as cost-effective, whatever the reasons were. Because solution architecture documents sometimes tell you what was built. And they rarely tell you why. And you must have been there. You go, well, what were they thinking? I would have done it completely differently.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So, being a bit pragmatic about it. And I mean, I always think about it as like trying to make justify the rationale for the significant design decisions. That's always my, you want to justify those really important decisions that really will possibly make or break the overall implementation.
And so you might do some proof of concept work, so some prototypes to validate novel data models or integration patterns or authentication mechanisms that you haven't worked with before. To satisfy some of the more challenging requirements you're anticipating. And so that work is fun, but it shouldn't be more than a couple of weeks, a couple of months work on a big program. I like to get started with development pretty quickly. I don't want to do 6 months worth of analysis and design up front. That's too much. And I want to start building things so that the users learn more about the Power Platform, because they can give us better requirements when they know more about the software. But also my teams want to learn more about the business so that they can build better solutions. And we don't learn an awful lot just by sitting and doing analysis and design. We learn more by developing software.
So I'm still in the job then. Is that what I'm hearing? Am I allowed still to do?
So that'd be a really good subject for another episode. Maybe is the role of a solution architect, a modern solution architect in an agile project, because I think it's different. A lot of roles are different, I think, in an agile project. I like to have very stable teams. We talk about how much is it going to cost. Well, my Scrum team is normally a fairly stable bunch of people. It's not mentally stable. They can be pretty hard to work with, but the composition of the team is fairly stable over time. Like we've got an analyst, a developer, a tester, an architect, and a Scrum master, and that means the composition doesn't change over time from sprint to sprint. And that means the cost is quite predictable as well. Whereas in a traditional project, you've got business analysts rushing in to do the upfront requirements analysis. Then you might have an architect or two coming in to do the design. And then they ride off, and then the developers come in. And if any requirements change, you've got to whistle, try and get a business analyst to come back and write another requirement. But they've been assigned to another project. That's a mess.
Yes, that rings a lot of bells. Yeah, I know what you mean.
All right, I didn't mean to trigger anybody listening or watching.
All right, I've got an eye twitch going on now. It's like, it's like a nervous disposition.
So they call it waterfall because that describes the tears flooding down your face.
Or the blood coming down because you're like killing. You're like, no, I'm done. And just forget it. I give up. I can't do another day of this without like doing something. So let's switch gears a little bit and let's hear about your podcast, AmazingApps.Show. What is this AmazingApps.Show of yours?
Thanks, Daryl. So Amazing Apps is my podcast. It's been going for about 3 years, 120 something episodes. And I like to mix it up with interviews with people who've actually built amazing applications. So it might be some Microsoft customers and partners. I've got an episode coming up with some folks from EY who built an internal application for posting financial transactions and built that really quickly. And they saved a ton of money, internal costs integrating with SAP. So those kind of stories of people who've done the cool work, built great applications, sharing some of their learnings and best practices with our community. It's like an audio case study, if you like. Those are really interesting. And then there's some solo episodes with me just either trying to answer some questions that I get from agile business apps builders or just sharing some of the lessons I've learned from some of my recent projects. Either where things have gone really well, and I think it's a good practice others might want to try and experiment with, or it's something that didn't go so well and you can really learn a lesson and avoid a calamity like mine.
Sometimes
that's what everyone wants to
more
hear
interesting.
About.
Yes.
Yes. Everyone wants to hear about how it all failed. Oh, this person that I think knows everything, they failed. How did they do it? What did they do? You're more sucky than I thought.
YouTube channel dedicated to that. He's made his career unveiling other people's incompetency.
Well, if you don't learn from it, you're going to just keep on making the same mistake, right?
That's a very good flipping it around, Daryl. Exactly.
I had a coworker that said when he hears like a teenager say, "I want to make my own decision. I want to make my own mistakes." You hear that. I want to make my own mistakes, and he's like, you don't need to get syphilis to know you don't want it. That was always his comment. Like, learn from others, okay?
Yes. Well, my kids aren't that age now, but I will have a chat with them this evening about sexually transmitted disease. Like my 7-year-old daughter would really appreciate that discussion.
I'm my first teenager.
Probably best not. Yes.
First teenager this week.
Wow.
Next week, I guess.
Wow. So you've got it all to come then, Daryl. It really, it's all there. It's gonna be the reality. I mean, my father used to say, well, son, you can learn the easy way or the hard way. And so I would usually go for the hard way, and
and you'd learn it really, really well.
But in retrospect, maybe I don't know. But that sounds. I mean, So do you have a lot of listeners for your Because obviously we have such a low number of listeners. So do you have a lot of listeners of your app?
Well,
Amazing Apps.
I just want to set the record straight. That I'm at least the 7th listener of the XRM Toolcast. I've listened ever since day one, all the episodes. Some I can follow along. Some I just try and act cool by listening to your show, to be honest. And not all of it sinks in, but we do okay. There's a solid band, a few hundred listeners tune in. My big question right now, and you guys are doing an amazing job of combining the audio podcast with a video channel as well. Should I go down that route? I don't have a face for YouTube like you guys have, so.
You have a face for radio, huh?
I have a face for radio, that's right.
Yes.
It's served me well.
Flattery will get you everywhere, Neil.
By the time you get to see my face, you've already paid the money for one of my courses, so it's too late by then anyway. Yeah.
Well, we'll definitely be putting a link into your podcast. So out of the 7 listeners that we have, I recommend everyone going in. So you should see at least a 7 increase in people. Well, one of them's yourself, so you wouldn't be able to listen to it. Yeah, but we'll be able to put a link into that.
It's you guys listen to your own podcast, I'm sure. Your partners probably do, and your mums, I'm sure, do. So that's the 6. Am I the only person in the community then that listens to?
Let's just leave it at that. Let's just move on. Then
let's just pretend that what you said was totally true. And yes.
I don't know about you, but my family have never listened to a single episode. And it comes on like sometimes in the studio and stuff. I like to listen to my own show to make sure there's no bloopers in it. But they'll turn it on, Dad. It's horrible, Dad. I don't want to hear your voice. I don't know if your family.
Well, if you haven't actually listened to or watched one of Neil's courses, you'll definitely recognize them from the Lego that you use, which is always just amazing. It's just so cool. I love the way that you use these. I mean, do you do all of that yourself? Do you get help from your kids? It's.
So I was 3 or 4 years ago. I wanted to build this course, teach people how to use the Scrum framework to apply that to business applications. How do you illustrate that? But of course, you just don't want to see my face on the screen all the time. Some of the concepts are pretty esoteric, and how do you illustrate those or bring them to life? And I saw like a Lego illustration or photograph of a meeting room with some business type Lego figures sitting around a meeting table. I thought, I could use that. My Scrum team is like a team of superheroes. So I went out and bought a whole lot of Lego figures, and I accumulated quite a lot of Lego in my business, which is great because it's a tax write-off. And then once I finished photographing it, the kids get it. So they love that. And they've helped me build a lot of it. And it kind of grown from there. But I'm at the point now where I've got a couple of thousand photographs of Lego stuff that I've used in my courses. But I also commission other people to do some stuff because they're much better at photography. And Lego photography is a fine art. You can tell the ones that I photographed because there's no background and they're not in focus and it's all a bit of a mess. So I've got some people doing that. And then there's one of the deposit photos, one of the websites I use, like one of stock photography. They've just got thousands and thousands of Lego images, so I can just pick some stock images in there, I pay a license and use those as well. And I've commissioned the cover of Winning Agile Projects, which is a masterclass I've got. So 2 race cars on a racetrack with tire smoke and headlights. That was something I commissioned. So I got somebody to mock up, they did the headlight flare, the lens flare.
Oh, yes, I saw that. That was awesome. Yeah, very, very effective. So very neat.
I took a really rough cut at home, sent it to them, and they photoshopped the heck out of it, and it looks awesome.
Well, I've got one of your minifigures somewhere around here, actually.
The collector's items now, because Lego has issued an edict saying they're going to clamp it down on any brand misappropriating the Lego minifigure trademark.
Oh, really? Wow.
Oh, so there's a limited edition, not to be printed again.
I don't want to get the Lego police around here.
Worth a fortune in the future, then that really could be. So you have to find it. I mean, hope my dog hasn't eaten it or something. It's like.
Yes, I used to send a little Lego minifigure with the customary logo on the shirt to students who completed my course. It cost me $3 or $4 internationally to ship those. That was great. And then Australia Post changed the pricing. So I just got a little envelope, a letter, and a Lego minifigure, and they changed the price from $3 or $4 to $37. That's not going to work anymore. I posted 100 of them to the UK for Scottish Summit, and that cost me $38 to ship 100 in a box. It cost me $37 to ship one in an envelope. So the last 100 of them got distributed at Scottish Summit. Thanks, Cheryl, for doing that.
That's crazy. Licensing's always kind of funny. When I worked at Power Objects, they had their Joe CRM guy, and when they bought him, they didn't like get exclusive rights to him.
Oh,
so
I've seen him
Joe
turn up in other
CRM would show up like in like Salesforce advertising sometime, and some other like advertising that was totally not Power
It's like
Objects. And
moonlighting.
hey, there's Joe. That's advertising completely different. So I thought that was kind of a funny idea. So
yeah, it's funny. Even a Microsoft stock image library. There was one I used when Neil Parkhurst came to Australia to train folks on a unified service desk. I took one of the Microsoft stock images. It's a guy in a contact center with a headset on, and we used that in our advertising for this training course. But the same guy keeps turning up in other contact center scenarios all across Microsoft. He's still working there, still at that desk. He still hasn't managed to resolve that case. What a poor sucker. Yeah. Reminds me of the CRM lady who used to splash up on your screen.
Oh, yes. The CRM lady. Yes. CRM lady. Yeah. Oh, fond memories.
These people have no idea that they've, most of the people have no idea like where their image has been used or whatever.
Do you reckon they are Microsoft employees or are they models who get hired by?
Well, there was an episode of Friends, wasn't there, where Joey had his image used. Do you remember that one? I'm probably not going to go. It goes back to Daryl's STDs kind of point he made earlier.
Oh, okay. All right. Thanks for keeping it PG.
Yeah, exactly.
On that note, before we go even more off topic, we should try to round this up and put a little bow on it. Is there anything we haven't gone over that we totally missed that we need to make sure we talk about or they share with our listeners, or we got the high points here?
The real things to get across are stop estimating in units of time. That's a recipe for disaster. Remember to listen to the Amazing Applications podcast right after you listen to every episode of the XRM Toolcast. And come along and take some of my free courses at customer.academy. I'd love to see you there.
Awesome. Well done. I can always tell when I give kind of like a sales guy because like they sound way better when they do these types of intros. Or you're like a dev, like, yeah, you should check out what is the name of my site, like
Yeah, it's like my GitHub repository. And
what a great elevator speech! I can only hope to attain to have Neil can do just something like that. That's
the
awesome.
slickness of Neil Benson's.
So not only is that how our listeners should get a hold of that's why he covered everything there, like 10 plus points, not hours, points. I'm getting 10 plus points to because I don't give hours, I give points to people.
I need to fill in a timesheet in points as well someday.
Good luck with that. I don't know if that would go over. We'll see. We'll see. Maybe estimate some household chores with your wife with points instead.
I feel it's going to backfire at some point, though. It's just.
Well, I'm going to get an invoice from my accountant in 70 gazillion points of legal advice.
What's the exchange rate on those points exactly?
Well, Scott, our listeners can use all their points to get a hold of Neil, I guess, and to send him some points remotely. How can our listeners, up to 7 now, how can our listeners get a hold of us?
Yeah, we'd love to receive your points. If you want to get in touch, you can email us at cast@xrmtoolbox.com or on social media, LinkedIn and Twitter @xrmtoolcast. And get in touch. And it's been fantastic, Neil. Thank you ever so much for coming on the show. Really great to hear about all of your experience. And looking forward to seeing more of those LinkedIn posts that draw me in, clickbait all the way.
Maybe some Lego figures, photos attached next time as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Clickbait that delivers. That's what it is.
Yeah, that's right. Good strapline. I like that.
Clickbait that delivers. Benson. That's your name. There you go.
That can be your LinkedIn profile.
All right. Well, we better let Neil go catch the bus, I guess. I don't know if he's abandoned the hope of going into the office today or not. But Neil, great talking to you. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers then.
This has been the XRM Toolcast with Daryl Labar and Scott Durrell. Produced by Lynn Zawin. If you have any questions or suggestions, please send them to cast@xrmtoolbox.com, tweet @XRM Toolcast, or hit us up on our LinkedIn XRM Toolcast page.